Let's talk about financial literacy. Why is it important? And when someone can say, hey, I am financial literate now.
Well, the reason it's important is because most people, plain and simple, MD, don't understand how money works. We as a nation, here in the United States, most people have learned two things about money: how to make it and how to spend it. Everything else doesn't matter.
Right.
But again, that's our society. We are a consumer driven culture. So, what most people do, what the majority of people do each and every day, is they wake up and they trade their most valuable asset, their time, at a job to earn money. And here's the key part: it's someone else's money. So, therefore, they don't even control that. And then they get that person's money and then they give it to somebody else.
Right.
And then they wonder why I don't have any money. It's because they don't understand how money works. So financial literacy, at least from our perspective at Forever Forward, is you need to know that. You need to understand that if you have a job, what you are doing each and every day is you're waking up and you're trading your most valuable asset, your time, and in return, you are given someone else's money. That's okay. That's how the system works. But what you have to then learn is that person, since they control the money, also indirectly control you. During the pandemic, we all know someone who lost a job as a result of the pandemic.
Right.
That is laid bare when you have a job, how at risk you are, that all that time you've given away to collect a paycheck, which is someone else's money, can be taken away from you. And when it is taken away from you, and you look at the checkbook or the savings account or whatever, you realize that you took that money, you took that person's money, and you gave it away to everyone else. In effect, most people spend their entire working life working to make other people wealthy.
Right.
And they forget about themselves. So financial literacy is important, MD, for people, so they begin to understand how money works. If I'm going to trade my most valuable asset, my time, for someone else's money, probably the first thing I need to learn is I probably should put a piece of this money to work for me,
Right.
as opposed to giving it away and making everyone else rich.
Right. And you talked about the foundations of financial literacy. What are some of these foundations?
Well, and again, great question, MD. And this is probably the biggest surprise when I meet with people and they ask me, so, hey, Scott, what's the first thing I need to know about how money works?
Right.
And regardless of how old they are, if they're an old guy like me or a young guy like you with a wife and a couple of kids running around or a business, the first question I ask them is, well, the first thing you need to know about how money works is, do you have a will? And they look at me a little and say, well, what's that got to do with anything? So, and the answer is, it has everything to do with how money works. Most of my discussions with people that choose to work with us begin with that discussion. No financial plan will work if you have not done the paperwork to protect it. So what's included in the paperwork? A will. And no one likes to talk about this because normally when you talk about this, something bad has to happen to somebody. But you have to have a will in place. That clearly outlines what your wishes and what your directives are. If you don't have a will in place, the court steps in and decides what happens to your money, to your house, to your car, to your boat, to your RV, to your clothes, to all your stuff. And your spouse, your partner, your kids can all be saying, but no, Dad said we could have it. And the court says, well, he should have written it down. and the court will decide. So having a will in place is step one. Step two is having what we call your power of attorney in place. A power of attorney is simply someone that you name to speak on your behalf if you are unable to. If you become sick and you are no longer able to speak for yourself, you need someone who knows what your wishes are to speak on your behalf. My father was an Alzheimer's patient.
Okay.
I was his power of attorney. Nothing happened in terms of my father's care until they spoke with me. Number one, because I was his power of attorney. But number two, I was also his health care surrogate. That is another major piece of building the proper foundation. You write your will, you name a power of attorney, and you name a health care surrogate. Again, a health care surrogate, just like your power of attorney, is someone that can speak on your behalf in terms of your health care needs. They can be two different people, they can be the same person, but without any of these basic documents in place, if I were to have a heart attack right now and fall on the floor in the middle of our show, MD, and my family didn't know well, here's the file.
Right.
Everyone would be looking around going, oh, what do we do next?
Right.
What happens to so building a proper foundation starts with looking at ourselves and saying, if something bad happens to me, and I mean no disrespect, but if I decide to get hit by a bus today, what happens to all of this stuff that I've worked so hard for my whole life? Or if I become ill and I'm no longer to act on my own behalf, I need to have someone or someone's in place that knows what I want and knows where the file is to say, nope, I'm the power of attorney. Here's what Scott's wishes were or are.
So the power of attorney, is going to be someone you really trust, right?
That's always helpful, yes.
A family member, who can be a power of attorney? Who you can
anyone can act as your power of attorney and or your healthcare surrogate. Generally, if when I'm working with clients and if they don't feel comfortable naming a family member or a trusted associate, generally what we do is we establish the law firm that drafts the will as the power of attorney and healthcare surrogate. Why does that work well? Generally, law firms don't go away.
Right.
You might name me as your power of attorney, but what happens to me? What happens if something happens to me? So generally, what we counsel folks to do when you're naming your powers of attorney and your healthcare surrogates, if you want it to be individuals, you probably want to name a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary, just in case something happens to one of those individuals. In my case, I have 3 daughters. All 3 of my daughters are my powers of attorney and my healthcare surrogates. So if something bad, wishing no bad, anything bad to my daughters, but if something happens to my daughters, I have that line of succession built in.
Wow.
So,
right.
And see, these are the type of dialogues that people go, well, how's that relate to, oh, it's over here, how money works? But that's really the basis. That's the foundation that you need to lay and have in place before you even begin to talk about building wealth or being on a cruise every year.
Wow.
That's where it all begins. That's where it should begin. That's where it should begin.